Now, unless you all spent the entire week hiking and sleeping without your cell phone, which is very enticing, believe me, you have undoubtedly been reading, thinking, and talking about Brexit. And maybe in the Q&A we'll talk about it in a little bit. I mentioned I've talked to the leaders from the UK, EU. I left out NATO. I met also with Jens Stoltenberg. And my message to all of them was very simple, that America's commitment to the EU and to Great Britain is as strong as ever to both the transatlantic partnership and to our special relationship. And the Brexit vote, in my judgment, and I think President Obama's judgment, does not affect the agenda that we share with NATO, the G7, the P5, and by the way, the NATO leaders, we will all be meeting in about a week in Warsaw for the NATO summit. And it actually makes that summit more important. It makes much of what we will be doing to reassure the frontline states and to make it clear how important that alliance still remains. So we will continue to collaborate with both the British and the EU. And I want to just emphasize, as I did in England yesterday, the values that we have shared for so long with our friends, the Brits, and that we shared in the vision of an EU, and the interests, and its interests and values that make up foreign policy, and its interests and values that brought us together. They are the same today as they were before the vote last Wednesday. Didn't change a thing. So remember that as we go forward. And I reminded both parties how critical it is to remain steady here. The steadiness of our purpose, I think, is evident and embraced by all. And the ability to rely on capable partners right now in this world that we're living in is more critical than ever, because it is increasingly clear that pundits and practitioners alike understand more and more of how we are living in a much more complex world than at any time in our history. For years, if you go back to the fall of the Berlin Wall and the great changes that came about thereafter, Tito, Yugoslavia, I mean, societies were compressed by the Cold War, by the entire post-World War II order. And a lot of societies were shielded by the absence of communication, by the slow pace of doing business, if they did business at all effectively, and by the simplicity of the bipolar East-West divide, which defined the world for the latter part, and even for most of, since 1917, for most of the 20th century. Now, as every single one of you knows, and as you talk about in every which way as we contemplate various disruptors in our lives and in society, we are dealing with a world which speeds up politics, speeds up a flow of information beyond the capacity of most people to digest it. And believe me, that was underscored by the fact that I noticed that the largest internet Google search in England the day after the vote was, "What is the EU?" I'm serious. So this is a world where globalization and instantaneous communication are connecting people in more ways than ever before. You know, the kids in Tahrir Square, that wasn't motivated by any religious extremism, nor were the kids who originally came out in Syria to demonstrate for a future. The fact is that we see more people connected in more ways than ever before, and so everybody knows what everybody else has, and that underscores what you don't have. It facilitates both incredible technological progress, and obviously economic growth that goes with it. I was just in Silicon Valley last week with the various CEOs of major companies there, listening to this discussion about these disruptors, which is fascinating. Any of you in the retail business understand what I'm talking about. But at the same time, there are a whole bunch of folks who believe they've been left behind. And in many places, my friends, they have been. And they're increasingly turning to a narrow-minded tribalism, to aggressive nationalism, and even medieval thinking that reminds us of a very distant and bloody past. So we have no illusion, I certainly have no illusion about the challenges. They are real in this 21st century. And while there are a lot of Cassandras around, I really don't believe the road ahead is defined only by turmoil and strife.